The dare seemed simple enough. Walk through the old, abandoned subway tunnel and emerge on the other side. Max, a thrill-seeking college student, brushed off the warnings about the place being cursed. It wasn't the first time someone dared him to do something ridiculous, and he prided himself on never backing down. The entrance loomed before him, swallowed in darkness. A faint, almost inaudible hum filled the air. His friends, drunk and laughing, stood behind him. "Bet you won't make it," one of them shouted. Max smirked, flipped them off, and stepped inside. The first few steps were uneventful. The tunnel smelled like mold and decay, its walls slick with moisture. The faint hum grew louder, resolving into what sounded like distant cries. Max slowed his pace, pulling out his phone to use as a flashlight. The beam illuminated graffiti, debris, and an unsettling trail of what looked like dried blood. Halfway in, he saw something strange, a pile of discarded clothing and shoes. They looked old, as if they'd been there for decades. Yet the air felt heavy with something recent, something alive. A low growl echoed ahead, stopping Max in his tracks. The beam of his phone trembled as he scanned the tunnel. In the distance, a figure crouched, its back to him. At first, Max thought it was a homeless person, but then the figure twisted unnaturally, snapping its head to face him. Its face, or lack thereof, was a hollow mask of flesh, with eyes like black pits. Max ran. The sound of claws scraping against the tunnel walls chased him, accompanied by guttural shrieks that pierced his ears. His legs burned, but he didn't dare stop. He didn't even notice when he tripped over a shoe, hitting the ground hard. His phone clattered away, leaving him in darkness. Something wet brushed against his ankle. Max kicked at the unseen presence near his ankle, scrambling to his feet as the wet, slithering sensation sent a wave of panic through him. His phone's dim light flickered in the distance, illuminating the grotesque figure crawling toward him. Its joints popped and cracked as it moved, the sound of its labored breath like nails on a chalkboard. He lunged for his phone, grabbing it just as the creature swiped at his leg. Its clawed hand scraped his jeans, leaving a shallow but stinging gash. Shaking, Max directed the flashlight at it. The beam revealed flesh stitched together in grotesque patterns, as though it were made of pieces of others. The hollow eyes fixed on him, and its grin widened, exposing jagged, blood-streaked teeth. Max turned and bolted further into the tunnel, his pulse hammering in his ears. Behind him, the creature's wails echoed, growing louder. The air grew colder, thick with a metallic tang that reminded him of blood. The sound of his own footsteps splashing through puddles became indistinguishable from the creature's pursuit. Suddenly, Max skidded to a stop. The path ahead forked into 3 dark tunnels. He hesitated, the creature's shrieks closing in. Choosing the right path felt like a gamble he couldn't afford to lose. He darted into the middle tunnel, its narrow walls pressing in like a coffin. The cries faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Relief surged, but it was short-lived. He stumbled into a small chamber, its walls lined with what looked like human bones arranged in grotesque patterns. At the center was a pit, and from it emanated a deep, rhythmic breathing. Before he could retreat, the creature appeared at the chamber's entrance, blocking his escape. Its grotesque form expanded, twisting and stretching unnaturally. Behind it, more figures emerged, silent, humanoid shapes with blank faces, their bodies twitching as though struggling against invisible restraints. Max's voice cracked as he screamed. The sound was swallowed by the pit, which now throbbed as if alive. The figures advanced, forcing Max closer to the pit. The rhythmic breathing grew louder, filling the room with an oppressive dread. He swung his phone wildly, the light revealing more horrifying details. Each figure wore remnants of clothing, shirts, dresses, uniforms, bloodied and torn. These were the people who had entered the tunnel before him. "No! Stay back!" Max shouted, his voice trembling. He picked up a bone from the floor, wielding it like a weapon. The creatures didn't flinch. They moved as one, their blank faces twitching in unison, forcing him closer to the edge. Desperation surged. Max threw the bone at the nearest figure and lunged for the tunnel entrance. But the creature from before, the one that had chased him, blocked the way, its massive frame filling the space. It opened its mouth, letting out a guttural scream that made Max's ears bleed. Behind him, the pit pulsed violently. He glanced over his shoulder, his heart sinking. Something enormous and serpentine began to rise, a mass of writhing flesh and jagged teeth. Max acted on instinct. He threw himself to the floor, crawling toward a gap in the bone-covered walls. The creatures didn't follow. Instead, they knelt before the pit as if worshiping the monstrosity emerging from its depths. Max crawled through the gap, tearing his hands on jagged bones. He didn't stop until he found himself back in the main tunnel. The cries and wails receded, replaced by a haunting silence. Finally, he reached the tunnel's end, collapsing on the ground outside. The cool night air hit his face, a temporary relief. But as he staggered to his feet, a horrifying realization hit him. The people on the street turned to stare at him with blank faces, no eyes, no mouths, just hollow features. The tunnel hadn't let him go.